The first thing you should know about humans is that they lie. Not maliciously, mind you. They lie to themselves, to each other, and apparently to the entire galactic community about their capabilities. 3 cycles ago, when Admiral Koreth of the Hegemony received the surrender transmission from the human fleet commander, we all thought it was over. The great human expansion had finally met its match against our superior technology and numbers. The message was garbled, corrupted by plasma interference from their dying flagship. All we could make out was static, broken words, and what sounded like weeping. Typical human emotional breakdown, we assumed. The debris field told a different story, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where this madness began, with me floating in the wreckage of what used to be the most advanced dreadnought in the Hegemony fleet. My name is Thane Vorik, and I served as Chief Intelligence Analyst aboard the HSV Dominator, past tense, because the Dominator is now scattered across 3 parsecs of space, along with most of my crew. The humans did that. The same humans who surrendered. The same humans who wept over their broken communications array. Funny thing about humans, they don't fight like any other species we have encountered. The Chlorians charge headfirst into battle, screaming their war cries. The Nixari use calculated precision strikes. The Draconis prefer overwhelming firepower. But humans, they do something else entirely. They improvise. 3 days before the battle, our intelligence suggested the human fleet was running low on ammunition, fuel, and hope. Their retreat pattern indicated desperation. Every tactical simulation showed the same result: complete human defeat within 6 hours of engagement. Our computers, our strategists, our battle-hardened admirals, all agreed. We were wrong. The engagement started exactly as predicted. The human fleet, led by Commander Maria Santos aboard the UHF Defiant, took position in the Kelper Nebula. Standard, defensive posture. Their ships were older, smaller, and outnumbered 3-1. Admiral Koreth even joked over the comm that this would be over before his morning stimulants wore off. The first salvo from our fleet lit up the nebula like a festival of destruction. Plasma cannons, particle beams, and quantum torpedoes streaked through space. The human ships scattered like frightened prey animals. Several took direct hits, their hulls cracking open like eggshells, venting atmosphere and crew into the void. That's when Commander Santos transmitted her surrender. The message came through on all frequencies, but the signal was breaking up. Plasma storms in the nebula were interfering with everything. All we could hear was her voice, distorted and weak. This is, Santos, we cannot sustain casualties too. Forgive us. We. Then static. Then silence. Admiral Koreth ordered a ceasefire. Standard protocol when accepting surrender. We began moving in to accept the human fleet's capitulation, already planning the victory celebration. The debris from their damaged ships floated around us like metallic snow. That's when I noticed something odd. The debris wasn't random. It was positioned, deliberately. I was monitoring the sensor arrays when the pattern became clear. The human ships hadn't scattered in panic. They'd moved into specific positions, using the nebula's natural interference to mask their true locations. The ships we'd been firing at were decoys, loaded with scrap metal and programmed to explode convincingly when hit. I tried to warn Admiral Koreth, but he was too busy accepting congratulations from high command. Besides, what could broken human ships do against our mighty fleet? We had them surrounded, outnumbered, and outgunned. The humans taught us a new word that day: checkmate. It started with the debris. Those innocent chunks of metal floating around our ships weren't random pieces of hull plating. They were mines. Thousands of them, disguised as wreckage, each one packed with enough explosive to crack a cruiser's armor. The first detonation caught the H-Spear Retribution amidships. The second took out the Eternal Victory's engine compartment. Within 30 seconds, half our fleet was either dead in space or spinning out of control. The humans had turned their own destroyed ships into weapons. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing that Commander Santos hadn't been surrendering. She'd been buying time. While we listened to her broken transmission, her crews were manually piloting those decoy ships into position, knowing full well they were suicide missions. The crying we heard over the comm wasn't defeat. It was her saying goodbye to the crews who wouldn't be coming home. Admiral Korath finally understood what was happening. When the real human fleet emerged from the nebula's far side, they'd been there all along, waiting. The ships we'd been fighting were barely 10% of their actual force. The retreat had been a feint. The desperation had been theater. The humans had played us like a badly tuned harmonic resonator. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a systematic dismantling of everything we thought we knew about warfare. The humans didn't just attack our ships. They attacked our assumptions. They used our own tactics against us, turned our strengths into weaknesses, and made our superior technology work for them instead of us. Commander Santos, who we'd assumed was dead, appeared on our main viewer. She wasn't crying anymore. She was smiling, a cold, calculating smile that made my 4 stomachs churn. "Admiral Korath," she said, her voice now clear and strong. "I believe you were expecting our surrender." The Admiral's mandibles clicked in confusion. "You transmitted surrender. We heard it." "No," Santos replied, tilting her head slightly. "You heard what you wanted to hear. My actual message was, this is Santos. We cannot sustain this charade much longer. Casualties too high on your side. Forgive us for what we are about to do. We didn't want it to end this way." The bridge fell silent. Even the air recyclers seemed to stop humming. "The corruption in our transmission," Santos continued, "wasn't from the nebula. It was intentional. We needed you to think we were broken, desperate, ready to give up. Humans have a saying, Admiral, all warfare is based on deception." That's when I realized something that would haunt me for the rest of my considerably shortened life. We hadn't been fighting the human military. We'd been fighting human creativity. Every ship, every tactic, every strategy they used had been improvised from whatever they had available. They'd turned garbage into guided missiles, used our own sensor readings to track our movements, and convinced us to defeat ourselves. The final insult came when Santos offered us terms for our surrender, not the annihilation we'd planned for them, but actual reasonable terms. Medical aid for our wounded, safe passage for our civilian ships, even technological exchanges that would benefit both species. "Why?" Admiral Korath asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Santos's expression softened slightly. "Because that's what humans do, Admiral. We fight like demons when we have to, but we prefer to build bridges. The war's over. Let's start building something better." As I floated in my escape pod watching the Dominator's reactor core breach in a spectacular display of fusion fire, I couldn't help but laugh. The sound echoed strangely in the small space, mixing with the hiss of my life support systems. We'd spent 3 years studying human military doctrine, analyzing their ship designs, intercepting their communications. We'd learnt about their weapons, their tactics, their apparent weaknesses. But we'd never bothered to understand the one thing that made them truly dangerous: their ability to make something from nothing, to turn a defeat into a victory, to look at impossible odds and say, "Challenge accepted." The rescue ships from the human fleet arrived 6 hours later. They pulled survivors from the wreckage without hesitation, treating our wounded with the same care they gave their own. Commander Santos herself visited the medical bay, where I was recovering from radiation exposure. "Why did you save us?" I asked her, speaking through the translation device they'd provided. She sat down beside my recovery pod, her expression thoughtful. "Because that's what we do. We fight when we have to, but we save everyone we can, even our enemies." "Your last message," I said, "the one about forgiveness. Were you really asking for forgiveness?" Santos nodded slowly. "For the deception, for the lives lost, for turning war into theater. We knew you were honorable fighters. We just needed to be better at being dishonorable ones. The irony wasn't lost on me. The humans had defeated us by being more ruthless than we'd expected, then saved us by being more compassionate than we deserved. 3 months later, I was back on my homeworld, filing my report with High Command. The war was over. The humans had won, but they'd done something unprecedented in galactic history. They'd chosen to be merciful in victory. The debris from that battle still floats in the Kelper Nebula. Sometimes, salvage crews find pieces of our ships mixed with pieces of theirs. It's become a sort of memorial, a reminder of the day the galaxy learned what humans really were. Not the savage barbarians we'd expected, not the technologically inferior species we'd dismissed, but something far more dangerous: improvisers, innovators, and most terrifying of all, optimists. The corrupted message we'd received that day wasn't a surrender. It was a warning. Commander Santos had been trying to tell us what they were about to do, giving us one last chance to withdraw with honor intact. We'd been too arrogant to listen. Now, as I prepare to file my final report, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if we'd actually heard her message clearly. Would we have recognized the trap? Would we have withdrawn? Would thousands of good soldiers on both sides still be alive? The answer, I suspect, is no. We would have assumed it was another human deception. We'd learnt to expect lies from them after all. We just never learned to expect the truth. The Tribunal convened exactly 97 days after the Kelper Nebula incident. I'd been dreading this moment since the rescue ships brought me home. Sitting in the witness chair, facing the Council of Hegemony leaders, I felt smaller than a quantum particle. High Chancellor Vorik leaned forward, his 6 eyes glowing with barely contained fury. Analyst Vorik, your report suggests that our entire military doctrine is fundamentally flawed, that we lost to inferior beings through sheer incompetence. I cleared my throat, tasting the metallic tang of fear. With respect, Chancellor, we didn't lose to inferior beings. We lost to beings we fundamentally misunderstood. Explain. Where do I even start? How do you explain to a council of beings who have never lost a war that sometimes the best strategy is to have no strategy at all? The humans don't fight like us, I began, choosing my words carefully. They don't follow established military doctrine. They adapt in real time, creating solutions that shouldn't exist. Chancellor Vorik's mandibles clicked dismissively. Improvisation is not a military strategy. It's desperation. That's what we thought too. The silence in the chamber was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Finally, General Kraxis spoke up from the back row. Analyst Vorik, are you suggesting that chaos is superior to order? I almost laughed. Almost, General. I'm suggesting that the humans have weaponized chaos. They have turned unpredictability into an art form. The months following the battle had been a crash course in human psychology. Our xenological teams had worked around the clock, trying to understand what had happened. The results were disturbing. Humans, it turned out, didn't just think outside the box. They didn't acknowledge the box existed in the first place. Take Lieutenant Jake Morrison, for instance. He'd been the pilot of one of the decoy ships, the ones we'd been shooting at while the real fleet air positioned. His ship had taken a direct hit from our main battery, enough firepower to vaporize a small moon. Instead of dying like any sensible being would, Morrison had used the explosion to propel his crippled vessel into our formation. The madman had turned his own destruction into a guided missile. When we interviewed him in the medical bay, he'd just seemed like the thing to do at the time. Ship was already toast. Might as well make it count. Seemed like the thing do. As if converting your death into a tactical advantage was just another Tuesday afternoon activity. But Morrison wasn't unique. Every human survivor had a similar story. They'd all made split-second decisions that should have been impossible, turning disadvantages into weapons, weaknesses into strengths. It was like watching someone juggle plasma grenades while riding a unicycle. Terrifying, impossible, and strangely beautiful. The humans, I continued, addressing the tribunal, have a concept called thinking outside the box. But that's not accurate. They don't think outside the box. They recycle the box, turn it into a weapon, and use it to build a better box. Chancellor Morvek's eyes narrowed. You are speaking in riddles, analyst. I'm speaking in human. The real revelation had come 3 weeks after the battle, when Commander Santos agreed to a cultural exchange program. Not a prisoner exchange, mind you. A cultural exchange. The humans had somehow convinced our leadership that understanding each other was more valuable than continued hostilities. Only humans would turn a military defeat into a diplomatic victory. Santos had arrived on our homeworld with a small delegation, including several of the pilots who'd nearly destroyed our fleet. They'd been welcomed as honored guests, not conquered enemies. The sight of Jake Morrison sharing drinks with the same officers who'd been trying to kill him days earlier was surreal. You have to understand, Santos had explained during one of our debriefing sessions, we didn't want to fight you. We wanted to find a way to coexist. But you kept pushing, kept demanding surrender. So, we had to show you that conquest wasn't going to be as easy as you thought. By lying to us, by showing you what we are capable of when we are desperate. You wanted to see human weakness. We showed you human strength, disguised as weakness. The woman was diabolical and brilliant, and absolutely terrifying in her casual confidence. But the most disturbing part of the exchange program wasn't the tactical discussions or the technology sharing. It was the laughter. Humans laughed about everything. They laughed about their near-death experiences, about their impossible victories, about their own stupidity. Lieutenant Morrison had actually giggled while describing how he'd manually piloted his exploding ship into our formation. Giggled, as if narrowly avoiding disintegration was amusing. Don't you understand the concept of fear? I'd asked him during one of our sessions. Oh, I was scared, he'd replied, still grinning. Scared out of my mind. But fear's just another piece of data. You can use it or let it use you. Another piece of data. The human had treated his own terror as a tactical resource. Now, sitting before the tribunal, I tried to explain this mindset to beings who'd never experienced true desperation, who'd never had to improvise their way out of certain death. The humans have a saying, I told the council, necessity is the mother of invention, but they have taken it further. They have made invention the mother of necessity. General Craxis leaned forward, meaning, they don't wait for problems to present solutions. They create problems that require solutions, then solve them in ways that shouldn't work but do. The battle in the Kelper Nebula hadn't been won through superior technology or overwhelming force. It had been won through what humans called thinking on your feet, a concept that roughly translated to making things up as you go along and hoping they work. The terrifying part, they worked. Commander Santos had spent the last hour of our final debriefing session explaining human military philosophy. It was like listening to someone describe organized chaos as a legitimate strategy. We don't have the luxury of overwhelming force, she'd said. We are usually outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed, so we have to be smarter, more creative, more willing to take risks that would make a sane person run screaming. But how do you train for that? How do you prepare for unpredictability? Santos had smiled, that same cold smile from the battle. You don't prepare for unpredictability. You embrace it. You learn to be comfortable with chaos. You practice being wrong and making it work anyway. The tribunal was getting restless. Chancellor Morvek's patience was clearly wearing thin. Analyst Vorik, your philosophical observations are interesting, but we need practical recommendations. How do we prevent future defeats? I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would probably end my career. We don't fight them. The chamber erupted in angry chittering and mandible clicking. General Craxis stood up, his battle scars pulsing with indignation. Are you suggesting we surrender to these primitives? I'm suggesting we learn from them instead of fighting them. Learn what exactly? How to be unpredictable, how to improvise, how to turn weakness into strength and defeat into victory. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the building's climate control systems humming in the walls. Finally, Chancellor Morvek spoke. You want us to become more like humans. I want us to become less like ourselves. Our predictability is our greatest weakness. The humans exploited it perfectly. The truth was, the humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They'd won a war by convincing their enemies to defeat themselves. They'd turned our own tactical superiority into a liability, our confidence into arrogance, our strength into weakness. And they'd done it while crying. The corrupted message had been the perfect psychological warfare tool. It had made us hear what we wanted to hear, see what we expected to see. We'd been so convinced of our own superiority that we'd ignored the evidence of our own senses. The debris hadn't been random, the ship positions hadn't been panic-driven, the surrender hadn't been real. But we'd seen what we'd expected to see, heard what we'd wanted to hear. Commander Santos had played us like a finely tuned instrument. There's something else, I said, knowing I was about to make things worse. The humans could have destroyed us completely. Their real fleet was 3 times larger than we estimated. They could have wiped us out. Then why didn't they? Because they didn't want to. They wanted to make a point, not commit genocide. They wanted to show us that continued aggression would be costly, not impossible. The implications were staggering. The humans had been holding back the entire time. The battle we'd considered a devastating defeat had been them showing restraint. General Kraxis's voice was barely above a whisper. Are you saying they could have won even more decisively? I'm saying they chose not to. They calculated exactly how much force was needed to end the war without unnecessary bloodshed. They turned military precision into an act of mercy. The tribunal adjourned without reaching a decision. I was escorted back to my quarters, where I found a message waiting from an unexpected source. Commander Santos. Analyst Vorik, her recorded voice said. I hope your testimony goes well. I wanted you to know that your analysis of our tactics was remarkably accurate. You understood something that most of your colleagues missed. We weren't just fighting a war. We were trying to prevent one. She paused, and I could hear the weight of command in her voice. The truth is, we were terrified, not of dying, but of becoming the monsters we were fighting against. Every human who flew those suicide missions, every pilot who turned their death into a weapon, they did it hoping it would be the last time anyone had to make that choice. Another pause. Your people aren't our enemies, analyst. You never were. You were just convinced that conquest was the only path to security. We had to show you that there were other options. The message ended with coordinates, an invitation to visit the human colony of New Geneva. Come see what we are building instead of destroying. Santos had said, bring your tribunal if they are interested in learning rather than just judging. I stared at the coordinates for a long time, thinking about debris fields and corrupted messages, about lies that were really truths, and truths that sounded like lies. The humans had won the war not through superior force but through superior understanding. They'd grasped something fundamental about conflict that we'd missed. Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to convince your opponent that fighting isn't necessary. 3 days later, I submitted my final report to the tribunal. It was shorter than they'd expected, simpler than they'd hoped. The humans are not our enemies, I wrote. They are our teachers. The question isn't how to defeat them. The question is whether we are smart enough to learn from them. The debris from the Kelpa Nebula battle still floats in space, a testament to the day the galaxy learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the willingness to use it differently than anyone expects. Commander Santos' corrupted message hadn't been a lie or a truth. It had been something more dangerous. A choice. A choice to hear what we wanted to hear, or to listen to what was actually being said. We'd chosen poorly, but humans being humans had given us another chance to choose better. The war was over. The real question was whether we were ready for the peace that followed. As I packed my belongings preparing for the journey to New Geneva, I couldn't help but smile. The humans had taught us something valuable. Sometimes the best way to win is to make sure everyone wins, even if it means weaponizing your own compassion to do it. The journey to New Geneva took 18 standard days aboard a human transport vessel. I'd expected military efficiency, sterile corridors, and suspicious glances. Instead, I found myself in what could only be described as organized chaos. The ship's captain, a weathered woman named Elena Rodriguez, introduced herself by offering me something called coffee and asking if I'd ever seen a human poker game. When I admitted I hadn't, she grinned and said I was in for an education. Poker, she explained as we sat in the observation deck, watching stars streak past, is basically human military strategy in miniature. Bluffing, reading your opponents, making calculated risks with incomplete information. She dealt cards with practiced ease, her movements fluid despite the artificial gravity fluctuations. The key isn't having the best hand. It's making your opponents think you have the best hand. Or making them think you have the worst hand when you actually have the best. That sounds like the Kelper Nebula battle. Captain Rodriguez laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Santos taught you well. She's one of our best poker players, by the way. Never shows her cards until the game's over. I watched her arrange her cards, noting how she held them close to her chest. Literally. Is this how all humans approach conflict? Pretty much. We call it keeping your cards close to your vest. Never let your opponent know what you are really thinking until it's too late for them to counter. The poker game lasted 3 hours. I lost spectacularly, partly because I couldn't read human facial expressions, but mostly because I kept trying to calculate optimal plays instead of adapting to what was actually happening. You are thinking like a computer, Rodriguez observed, collecting the chip. Humans don't think like computers. We think like humans. Which means what, exactly? Which means we factor in things that don't make logical sense. Intuition, emotion, lucky guesses, the feeling that something's not right even when all the data says it is. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with those unsettling human eyes. Your people lost the war the moment you assumed we were logical. Logic is predictable. Humans are not. The next morning, I woke to find the ship's corridors buzzing with activity. We'd arrived at New Geneva, and the docking procedure was unlike anything I'd seen before. Instead of the rigid protocols of Hegemony ports, the humans seemed to be improvising their way through everything. Ships approached from multiple angles, following flight paths that looked random but somehow avoided collisions. Ground control gave suggestions rather than orders. Pilots made real-time adjustments based on conditions that changed moment by moment. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Welcome to human space traffic control," Rodriguez said. Noticing my expression, "We gave up trying to control everything years ago. Now we just try to guide it in the right direction." The colony itself was even more shocking. Where I'd expected military installations and defensive fortifications, I found parks, markets, and what appeared to be a university campus. Children played in the streets, while adults worked in gardens that seemed to grow randomly throughout the urban landscape. Commander Santos met me at the spaceport, looking remarkably different in civilian clothes. Without her military uniform, she seemed younger, more approachable, less like the tactical genius who'd orchestrated our defeat, and more like someone's older sister. "Analyst Vorik," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "Welcome to New Geneva. I hope the journey wasn't too traumatic." Captain Rodriguez introduced me to poker. Santos winced dramatically. "Elena's a shark. Please tell me she didn't take all your money. I don't understand the reference to marine predators. It means she's very good at convincing people to make bad decisions, usually involving their finances." The tour of New Geneva was revelatory. The colony wasn't just a settlement, it was an experiment in organized chaos. Buildings seemed to have been placed randomly, but as Santos explained, each location had been chosen for multiple overlapping reasons. The schools next to the market, because children learn better when they can see practical applications of their studies. The hospitals in the center, because everyone needs to be able to reach it quickly. The spaceports on the edge, because takeoffs are noisy, but it's connected to everything by the transport network. But there's no overall plan, No central authority dictating placement. There is a plan. It's just not the kind of plan your people would recognize. It's adaptive, organic, responsive to changing needs. We walked through the market district, where vendors sold everything from food to artwork to what appeared to be small electronic devices that served no obvious purpose. The chaos was overwhelming, but somehow it all worked. How do you coordinate all this without central control? Santos stopped at a fruit stand, purchasing something that looked like a purple apple. We don't coordinate it. We facilitate it. We create systems that allow people to coordinate themselves. She bit into the fruit, juice running down her chin. Your people think organization comes from the top down. Orders from superiors, executed by subordinates. But that's not how humans work best. We organize from the bottom up. Everyone contributes to the whole, but no one controls the whole. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. Sometimes it is, but it's also a recipe for innovation. When everyone has the freedom to try new things, some of those new things turn out to be brilliant. We continued walking, and I noticed something strange. Despite the apparent chaos, despite the lack of visible security, despite the mixing of military personnel and civilians, everyone seemed happy, relaxed, content. Your people aren't afraid, I observed. Should we be? You are on the frontier. You are surrounded by potentially hostile species. You have no central authority to maintain order. Santos stopped walking, turning to face me directly. Analyst Vorik, let me ask you something. In your society, how much of your energy is spent on maintaining control and preventing chaos? On enforcing order? I thought about it. A significant percentage, perhaps 30 to 40% of our resources. And how much of that energy is available for actually solving problems, creating new things, improving life for your people? The implication hit me like a plasma bolt. You are suggesting that our need for control is limiting our potential. I'm suggesting that your fear of chaos is preventing you from harnessing its power. We entered a building that appeared to be some kind of research facility. Scientists and engineers moved between workstations, collaborating on projects that seemed to shift and evolve as I watched. This is where we developed the tactics that defeated your fleet, Santos said casually. Not in a military planning room, but in a civilian research lab. Watched a team of researchers arguing over a holographic display, their voices rising and falling in animated discussion. It looked like chaos, but as I listened more closely, I realized it was organized chaos. Each person was contributing a different perspective, building on each other's ideas, creating something that none of them could have developed alone. The decoy ships, the debris mines, the communication deception, all of it came from this room. Some of it, other ideas came from the maintenance crews, the cargo handlers, even the cafeteria staff. When you are facing impossible odds, you need impossible solutions. And impossible solutions come from impossible places. One of the researchers, a young man with grease-stained fingers and wild hair, looked up from his work. Commander Santos, is this the alien analyst who figured out our tactics? Analyst Vorik, meet Dr. Marcus Webb. He's the one who suggested using our own destroyed ships as camouflage. Webb grinned, extending a hand that was distinctly sticky. Sorry about the mess. I was just calibrating a new propulsion system. It's supposed to be impossible, but we are making it work anyway. How do you make impossible things work? By refusing to accept that they are impossible. Most limitations are just assumptions in disguise. He led me to his workstation, where a complex array of equipment hummed and sparked. This drive system shouldn't work according to known physics. But it does work, because we built it before we proved it was impossible. That seems backwards. That's human engineering for you. We build first, understand later. Sometimes understanding kills innovation. Dr. Webb activated the drive system, and I watched in fascination as space seemed to bend around a small test object. The mathematics were beyond anything in our databases, but the results were undeniable. Your people spend too much time planning and not enough time doing, he continued. By the time you have figured out all the reasons something won't work, we have already built 3 versions and are working on the 4th. Santos guided me away from the lab, but the conversation continued as we woke. This is why we won the war, Anna. Not because we had better weapons or superior strategy, but because we had better questions. What kind of questions? Instead of asking, how do we defeat a superior force, we asked, how do we convince a superior force to defeat itself? Instead of asking, how do we win this battle, we asked, how do we end this war? We reached a viewing platform that overlooked the entire colony. From this vantage point, the organized chaos made more sense. The seemingly random placement of buildings created natural flow patterns. The lack of rigid structure allowed for adaptation and growth. Your final report to the Tribunal, Santos said. I have read it. You recommended that your people learn from us. I did. But you didn't tell them the most important lesson. Which is, Santos smiled. That same calculating smile from the battle, but warmer now. That learning from humans means learning to be comfortable with being wrong, to embrace uncertainty, to find strength in vulnerability. I'm not sure my people are ready for that lesson. They don't have to be ready, they just have to be willing to try. As the colony's artificial sun began to set, casting long shadows across the settlement, I found myself thinking about the corrupted message again, about the debris that wasn't random, about the surrender that wasn't real. Commander Santos, I said, that final message, the one we thought was your surrender. What were you really trying to say? She was quiet for a long moment, watching the lights come on across the colony. I was trying to say goodbye to the war, to the fear, to the need for enemies. I was trying to say hello to whatever came next. And what came next? This, she said, gesturing at the colonies spread out below us, a place where chaos and order dance together instead of fighting, where different species can learn from each other instead of trying to dominate each other. And if my people aren't ready for that dance? Santos turned to face me, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before in any human. Not calculation, not tactical awareness, but simple, genuine hope. Then we will wait. And while we wait, we will keep building, keep learning, keep proving that there are better ways to live than in fear of each other. Even if it takes generations. Especially if it takes generations. Humans are very good at playing the long game. Analyst. We have been practicing for millennia. The next morning, I began my journey home, carrying with me more than just observations and reports. I carried questions that had never occurred to me before, possibilities that challenged everything I thought I knew about civilization and progress. The corrupted message had been the beginning of my education, not the end. And like all good human strategies, it had worked by teaching me to teach myself. The debris wasn't random, the surrender wasn't real, and the lessons would never stop coming. As long as I was willing to keep learning,